Thank you all. Good morning. I think I can use these mics, right? I don't need this one. Maybe I'll pick up double. So thanks so much for being here. I have to say that this is was a little bit outside my comfort zone. I'm a high school principal by training, so I'm used to doing about 5-minute inspirational speeches because that's about how long you can keep 16-year-olds before they go to sleep. And so when the prospect of an hour came up, I thought, wow, what will we do for the next 55 minutes? And so on the plane last night, I was thinking on the way out here about what is it that I could share, that we could talk about, because this is really, in some ways, if there ever was a preaching to the choir moment, this is it, which is we have folks who are here all gathered and all believe in the call. And so what I tried to do this morning is talk about some comments about where I think we are and where I think we're heading, and really use it to try and stimulate a conversation. And so this is new content. I have to say the last time I did something like this, I was about 10 blocks from here, and I was coming out of the college library the night before my term paper was due for Harold Bloom's English seminar. And I decided the semester of research I'd done wasn't that interesting. I would just throw it all away. I had this really new idea that I was going to spend the night writing on that I'm sure Harold Bloom would love. When I got that paper back, it only had one sentence which said, "This is so badly written it is almost unreadable." So I'm hoping my reception is at least slightly better than that this morning. So as a part of my own story, yeah, it was a while ago that I graduated from Yale College here and went off to start my career in education teaching in high school English in the Mississippi Delta. And out of those 2 years, I ended up writing a book which I think maybe 3 of my family members have read, and that might be about it. But it was about my experience in the Delta. And in the first couple of pages, I wondered aloud about this idea that we were really in the midst of the next wave of the civil rights movement in trying to change the fundamental outcomes for kids. And I, probably like everybody else in this room, thought that I had invented that idea. And now I think all of us uniformly agree that this is fundamentally about fulfilling an old promise of equality to make sure that we fix the education system in an ongoing and sustainable way. What I think we haven't done yet, or I haven't done yet, is if we believe that is the case, if we believe that we're taking lessons and finishing work that was started in the civil rights movement, it makes sense, I think, to stop and look at what were the nature of our successes in that first generation of the movement 30 or 40 years ago. What did we do well? And what is the work that is unfinished? And what lessons does that work from 40 years ago offer for our work today? So I have 4 ideas I want to run by you. None of them have to do with why Queen Lear is not in the play, which was my Harold Bloom theory. But 4 ideas I want to talk about a little bit today, and talk a little bit about context in the civil rights movement of 50 years ago and context in the struggle of today. And there are 4 ideas. I'll frame them for you now. The first is, what is our message? What is our message and what kind of impact is it having? The second is, how are we coalition building? What does the coalition look like? How are we putting it together? And what does that mean for our chances of success? The third is, what are we doing to make integration a goal in itself? And the fourth is, what are we putting in place to secure and ensure lasting change, as opposed to momentary change? And so, as I began to think about those, I stopped and put aside what I think are the 4 big questions that we've all been working on for the last 10 years or so. Questions that are by no way resolved, but that I want to leave aside for right now, but I'll walk through those quickly. I think the first question was, as the dean mentioned, can we actually convince people of the urgency of the problem? Can we convince people that education is the most important problem that we have to solve? And I think there is increasing examples that that's the case. Whether you look at the significant attention around Waiting for Superman, the films this year, or the lottery, whether you look at NBC's National Education Summit from last year, that they spent 2 or 3 days just looking at the crisis in American education. Even if you look at basic public opinion polls, not so much at the federal level, but at the state level, people will say often that education is one of, if not the most important priority. So I think convincing of the urgency of the problem, we're well underway. We also were, I think, in the last 10 years, even if we convince people of the urgency of the problem, could we convince them that it's possible to fix that problem? I think also, thanks to people in this room, over the last 10 to 20 years, we've begun to make inroads to show that it is a fixable problem. You think of Amistad, that's 10 blocks from where we stand. We think of schools like our own West Denver Prep in Denver, founded by a Build the Excellent School fellow, Chris Gibbons, which serves, and there are schools in many of our cities that do this now, but serves 99% low-income kids, all Latino, many of them first-generation immigrants, and they have a building about 5 blocks away from a magnet school in Denver. Which is every kid has to, it's a gifted and talented school, highly gifted and talented, every kid has to test in. So you have kindergartners taking the, the bar exam essentially. It's like 12 hours of testing to get, and these are the, my neighbors, the kids who's only have 2 doctors for parents. They don't actually have enough, doctors as grandparents to get them all the way there. Flashcards since the womb, the whole deal, right? So you have 10 blocks away, these 2 schools. And we have, the ongoing conversation about growth, which is we know that some kids may start 4 or 5 years ahead of our kids, but we're growing faster. In the last 2 years, West Denver Prep has not only outperformed the students down the road at Polaris on growth, they have outperformed them on raw achievement, which is to say, in 1 year, adults in that building have found a way to outdo 12 years of flashcards at home. Right? So, and there is examples of that at the school level. There are examples at the systems level, work like we see in New Orleans, work like Andres Alonso is doing in Baltimore, work like what we see happening in DC. So I think we have emerging some proof points to show that it's possible. Definitely that work is not done. And the third is, okay, well, even if we convince people of the urgency and we show them that it's possible, do we have the talent pipeline to deliver the people to do the work? The best answer to that question is sitting in this room. And while this certainly is not over yet, you also look at places like Teach for America, which I think is now harder to get into than Yale College, probably. I'm glad I got in early. And New Leaders for New Schools. But you also look at the pipeline of alums from this campus over the last 10 to 15 years. Look at folks like Daisha Toll, who's running Amistad. Look at folks like John King, who is the Assistant Commissioner of Education in New York City. Look at folks like Michael Bennett, who was a school superintendent and now a U.S. Senator. What you see are a growing pipeline of people coming out of our most esteemed institutions in the country saying the place to plant my flag is in education reform. So if we convince people of the urgency, we show them it's possible, we attract the talent, will we be able to summon the political will to actually deliver on transformative change? And there too, I think while we're a long way from done, there's enough evidence to say this too is possible. Right? You look at folks like Michelle Rhee, or you look at folks like Joel Klein, or you look at, for instance, the President of the United States, who I had the fortune of working on his campaign, and when he was 25 points down in Iowa or when he was the presumptive favorite, in both of those instances, he would walk into rooms of folks and say, here's what I believe is necessary for education reform, and here's what I'll do when I'm president, and if they booed him off the stage or didn't, he stuck to that agenda. And so I think the notion that it's not politically possible anymore is also one that maybe for the moment we can set aside. It will take tremendous courage. It will take folks in this room to lead. But I think those are the things that we know are the problems and we're working on. So with that as a framework, I want to step back now and talk a little bit about what are these lessons from the civil rights movement and what might we be able to learn now. And I think there are 2 things that we did well, and I'm going to use we to describe the civil rights movement even though I wasn't there, because I think we inherit that same legacy, so we were part of the same work. There are 2 things I think we did well, and there are 2 pieces of unfinished business. And what I've found more and more in this work right now is that so much of this is about the effectiveness of the message. And so when I think about the message that made the original civil rights movement so effective, I think there are 2 distinct categories of folks that Dr. King and others had to speak to. There are what I'll call opponents and what I'll call allies. And the opponents were folks who disagreed about the ends. They disagreed about the fundamental ends that we were seeking, which is we believe actually that black folks and white folks ought to be able to sit at the same lunch counter, ride the same buses, go to the same colleges, get the same jobs. Those are the Bull Connors in the context of 50 years ago. Right? And there I think my favorite quote is the very beginning of the I Have a Dream speech, where King talks about, in large part we have come to the nation's capital to cash a promissory note. Which is, the Declaration of Independence made this promise that all Americans were to fall heir to certain inalienable rights. And if you believe that, then you have to believe that these rights are for everybody. And the power of that message was that it calls on a common and deeply held set of convictions about what we as a people are about. And if you can't support this in one context, it makes you begin to doubt it in all contexts. Which is to say, if you fundamentally can't believe that equality is open to all, what else is it that you don't believe about equality? What else is it that you don't believe about those fundamental tenets of our culture that were written by the folks that even the opponents would lionize, the Jeffersons and the Washingtons and the Madisons? So I think that incredibly effective to hold America up to the mirror and say, these are what you have said all along are your deepest values. If you can't stand for them, tell us why you should rip up the Declaration of Independence. But the second, and I think a more interesting question for today, is how is it that we speak to our allies? And here, I think by allies, I mean folks that agree on the ends, but disagree on the means to that end. And the best example in King's work on that is the famous letter from a Birmingham jail. Right? He opens it by saying, you know, I never normally answer my critics, because if I answered my critics, I would do nothing else. But here I'm going to take the time to write an open letter to white and black ministers who have come out against me, because I believe actually we are folks that agree on the same goal, but you're telling me that I'm going about it in the wrong way. And he writes what is one of the great treatises of American democracy, I think, about the urgency. But what his message to them is, and I brought a quote, is that he says, the great risk is then what he called the white moderate. Right? Where he says, those who are more devoted to order than to justice, who prefer a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly say, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with you on the methods that you choose. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is much more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance, much more bewildering than outright rejection. But the challenge here is for those people that agree with the ends but disagree with the means, what is required is to communicate a profound sense of urgency and to show that you can't both you can't keep deeply held beliefs about what you think the ends ought to be and then equivocate around the urgency of the means. Right? And this, I think, is what leads us to what is the moment we are in right now, which is the opponents are far fewer. There are far fewer Bull Connors now, but there are far more of our white and black moderate preachers to contend with. There are some folks left in the Bull Connor category, right? There are folks who will say it is far more important to focus on developing excellence in this country than on developing equity, as if the two are different. Right? They'll say it's much more important that we figure out how we get 30 more engineers per year out of Yale to compete with China and India than it is to make sure that the kids from Roberto Clemente actually have the same opportunity as the kids from Milton to get into Yale. The basic lie of that proposition, right, is actually the only way you get to excellence is by more systematically and broadly harvesting equity, right, which is you would never think that the Denver Broncos would do their recruiting by saying we will only take tryouts from folks who went to suburban upper middle class high schools. They will say we will search for talent wherever we find it because we know talent is equally distributed across the entire population. And by developing a better recruitment path of knowing where that talent is and generating it, you actually 10x, 15x the number of great engineers you have if we actually were developing the engineers at Roberto Clemente. So there are those folks still to answer. But I think far greater are our friends to answer who say, oh no, we believe we want all kids to get a great education. We just believe that the way you're going about it is too ambitious, too reckless, too quick. And I think to those folks, we have the largest challenge now to be able to communicate a message of urgency. But I think that message is about we are here to serve kids based on evidence and not on ideology. Because I say that the folks who are concerned now, and they are institutional actors, and there are many. My predecessor, Senator Groff, is here. I always say I'm the new and less improved Peter Groff because I took his place in the Colorado Senate.